There's a moment every man has felt, even if he can't describe it. A strange shift in the energy between him and a woman. She pulls away, not with anger, not with words, but with silence, with absence. And he's left spinning, wondering, what did I do wrong? The truth is, you didn't do anything. You're just being tested. You see, beneath the surface of many modern relationships, a set of psychological patterns is quietly at work. Not because women are evil manipulators, but because biology has wired them, over millions of years, to behave in specific ways when they're bonding with a man. What's terrifying isn't that women use these tactics. It's that they don't even realize they're using them. These unconscious strategies have one purpose: to evaluate your emotional strength. And unless you know what's happening, they will control you. Let's dive into the first manipulation women use: emotional withdrawal. She pulls away. Not physically, not dramatically, but the warmth disappears. Her texts get colder, her voice gets shorter, and your brain hits the panic button. You replay conversations, analyze your tone, and try to fix what you can't even name. But this isn't about what you said. It's about how you react to the shift. This subtle withdrawal isn't punishment. It's a subconscious scan of your emotional calibration. A woman's biological instinct checks. Will he fall apart when I step back? Will he chase me like I'm oxygen? If you do, if you apologize, overgive, or spiral into anxiety, you've already failed the test. Because here's the real secret. The more psychologically dependent you are on her affection, the more control she unconsciously feels entitled to exert. Her attention becomes a scarce resource, and you become the customer begging for more. This isn't personal, it's primitive. It's survival-level testing. It's how evolution taught her brain to measure your leadership potential. The second tactic is what I call mirrored magnetism, and it's even harder to detect. When a woman is in the early stages of attraction, she doesn't just show interest. She becomes your perfect mirror. Suddenly, she's into your favorite music. She shares your views. She agrees with your pace. She reflects your emotional needs so well that you believe you've found your soulmate. But it's not a lie. It's a bonding mechanism. Biologically, this is how a woman builds safety. By aligning with your identity, she earns your trust faster. Her subconscious is saying, let me blend into your world until you let me in emotionally. And it works. You feel seen, heard, and matched. But the moment she senses your attachment is locked in, her true preferences start to show. The switch isn't a betrayal. It's biology relaxing its grip. You weren't manipulated with evil intent. You were bonded. That illusion of perfect compatibility was her nervous system doing its evolutionary job, drawing you in. Now, when the compatibility begins to dissolve and she becomes less invested in your hobbies or ideals, it can feel like you've lost her. But in truth, you never really had that version of her. She was temporarily adapting to secure emotional safety. And now that she feels secure, she no longer has to mold herself to your desires. The third tactic? Emotional responsibility transference. This is one of the most disorienting traps a man can fall into, because it's dressed up as love. A woman gets upset. Maybe she's disappointed, or sad, or anxious, and her demeanor subtly suggests, this is your fault. She never has to say it outright. Her tone, her silence, her sighs, they all imply that something you did has created her emotional discomfort. And because you're a good man, you want to fix it. You take the blame. You apologize. You try to do better. But here's where the programming kicks in. Every time you respond to her negative emotion with self-correction, she learns, without realizing it, that your behavior can be shaped through guilt. She doesn't even need to ask for anything. Her pain becomes the trigger. Your guilt becomes the leash. And over time, she uses it, unknowingly, to lead you wherever her emotional state wants to go. The tragedy? It uses your best qualities against you, your protectiveness, your empathy, your desire to be dependable. Slowly, her emotions become the compass for your actions, and you don't even realize you've handed her the wheel. The fourth tactic turns relationships into casinos. Hot and cold emotional cycling. One day, she's affectionate, glowing, deeply connected. The next day, she's distant, bored, unavailable. You never know which version you're going to get. But the highs are so intoxicating you chase them through the lows. This is intermittent reinforcement. And it's the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. If you got a reward every time you pulled the lever, it wouldn't be exciting. But when the wins are rare and unpredictable, that's when your brain gets hooked. This tactic isn't usually intentional, but it's devastating. When her love feels inconsistent, you try harder. You overinvest. You push through the cold spells, hoping for the return of warmth. And because the cycle eventually rewards you with attention again, you stay trapped. Just like the gambler, you're waiting for the next hit of dopamine. And just like that, she's trained you to become addicted to her mood swings. Fifth, there's a tactic so subtle that most men mistake it for love. Suggestion as influence. She doesn't demand. She doesn't ask directly. Instead, she plants little seeds in your mind. I saw this beautiful necklace the other day. Sarah's boyfriend took her on a surprise trip, so romantic. I've always wanted to go to that concert, but no one's ever taken me. She's not asking, but your brain hears the signal. If I do this, she'll be happy. And suddenly, you feel like it's your idea. You want to give. You want to surprise her. But what's happening isn't generosity. It's conditioning. This method works so well because it doesn't trigger your defenses. She's not controlling. She's just sharing. But each carefully crafted comment reshapes your perception of what's expected in the relationship. And over time, your decisions are less about what you want and more about avoiding disappointment. Sixth, we arrive at one of the most intoxicating weapons in the female arsenal: emotional overwhelm through love bombing. In the early stages of connection, a woman's body floods with bonding chemicals, oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin. And her expression of this chemistry feels like a fairy tale. You're incredible. You're perfect. You're the one. It's fast, intense, and powerful. You feel seen, chosen, and desired. And your guard comes down. Fast. This isn't manipulation in the typical sense. She genuinely feels this surge of emotion. But the problem is, you get hooked. That early intensity becomes the benchmark, the gold standard. And when things normalize, as they always do, you interpret the drop as a loss of love. You crave the high again. You work harder to bring back that euphoria. And without realizing it, you become a man chasing the ghost of a feeling that was never sustainable to begin with. And now, you're vulnerable. We've peeled back the curtain on 6 unconscious tactics women use to influence emotionally vulnerable men. But that's just the beginning. Because once these core strategies are in place, a second layer of manipulation begins to unfold, often without either person realizing it. And this second layer is where things get darker. It's where guilt becomes currency, silence becomes punishment, and love begins to resemble a game of chess. Let's begin with one of the most confusing patterns men face: the guilt twist. You suggest something, a dinner spot, a weekend plan, a vacation idea. She agrees. But later, sometimes days or weeks, she lets it slip. I just went along with it because I didn't want to make you upset. Or, I knew you wanted it, so I kept quiet. Suddenly, the event you thought was mutual becomes a source of hidden resentment. You're now cast as selfish. The guilt hits. You start wondering if you're being too controlling, too inconsiderate. But let's be clear. What just happened wasn't about the plan. It was about power. She never voiced a concern, never set a boundary, never asked for a change. But by retroactively expressing disapproval, she's crafted a narrative where your leadership becomes a flaw. You feel guilty for not reading her mind. And worse, you start doubting your ability to lead at all. This isn't emotional honesty. It's a passive-aggressive reversal. And once you internalize it, it undermines every decision you make going forward. Another tactic wrapped in sarcasm is what I call camouflaged contempt. It sounds like a joke, it looks like a tease, but it feels like a knife. You open up about something, your appearance, your career goals, your fears, and later she throws it back with a smirk. Well, maybe if your boss respected you. Or, you still think that's going to happen? Cute. If you react, if you get hurt, she hides behind humor. Oh my God, you're so sensitive. I'm kidding. Lighten up. But here's the reality. She just scanned your weakness and marked it with a joke. You've been emotionally exposed, and she filed it away, either to push boundaries or to control the frame. The moment you tolerate this, you've told her exactly how to make you question your worth. Now let's talk about the nuclear silence, emotional shutdown. This is when she goes ghost, not for a few hours, but for entire days. No explanation, no argument, just ice. She withdraws affection, eye contact, touch, and conversation. And you, confused and scrambling, try to figure out what you did. But that's the trap. The silence is not about conflict resolution. It's about punishment without process. It tells you, you did something wrong, and I'm going to make you guess what it was. It keeps her in control and puts you in permanent anxiety. She doesn't say, I need space. She doesn't say, that upset me. She just disappears emotionally, and you're stuck in emotional purgatory, too scared to push back, too uncertain to stand firm. And when the silence ends, she acts like nothing happened. No explanation, no closure, just a reset, as if your emotional spiral never occurred. And that's exactly how power solidifies. Next comes one of the most devastating tools of unconscious control, withholding intimacy. It sounds simple, but the implications run deep. After a disagreement, or even after a perceived slight, she suddenly becomes too tired. She's not in the mood, or has a lot on her mind. And maybe that's all true. But when this pattern repeats, and only shows up when things don't go her way, it's not about fatigue. It's about leverage. She's turning connection into currency. And now, affection is something you earn, not something you receive. You begin walking on eggshells, hoping to avoid shutting her down. And just like that, the most sacred part of your connection becomes a behavioral reward system. The moment intimacy becomes a tool, your relationship is no longer a bond. It's a contract. And you didn't sign it. You were conditioned into it. Then there's the big one, the everything is your fault tactic. She's upset. She's anxious. She's angry. You didn't even do anything related to the issue, but somehow, it all leads back to you. You weren't supportive enough. You didn't notice she was struggling. You weren't comforting in the right way. It doesn't matter that she didn't communicate. It doesn't matter that the situation was out of your control. In her emotional world, your failure to preemptively fix everything becomes the narrative. And here's where it gets dangerous. Over time, you internalize it. Now, every time she's upset, you go into fix-it mode, automatically blaming yourself, even when the evidence says otherwise. This is emotional gaslighting, but delivered with just enough subtlety that you believe the story. If she's hurting, I must have failed. What this tactic does is outsource emotional regulation. She never has to develop that skill, because you're doing it for her. You become her emotional manager, her crisis handler, her internal therapist, and in the process, you lose sight of your emotional state. Let's not forget the never wrong reflex. Have you ever tried to explain your feelings, only to be met with defensiveness, sarcasm, or a full-blown counterattack? No matter what the issue is, she's always the exception, always misunderstood, always the one reacting to your problem. At first, you might stand your ground. But after the third or fourth time, you just let it go. Not because you agree, but because arguing feels useless. What just happened? You've been trained. Trained to suppress your voice. Trained to avoid conflict. Trained to carry the emotional burden of the relationship so she doesn't have to. Over time, you stop speaking up. You stop correcting her. You stop holding her accountable. And she becomes, effectively, unchallengeable. Now, let's talk about the role technology plays in this entire game. In the past, these patterns took days, weeks, and months to unfold. Today, with smartphones, social media, and constant connectivity, manipulation happens at the speed of dopamine. She doesn't need to withdraw in person anymore. She just leaves your message on seen. She doesn't need to tell stories. She can post Instagram highlights with other men. She doesn't need to suggest gifts. She can share a Pinterest board or accidentally forward you a wish list. Every tactic we've covered now has a digital upgrade. And what that means is this: the pressure on men has intensified. Because the tactics that used to be private are now public, constant, and algorithmically reinforced. Even worse, other women and men become tools in these unconscious games. A flirty comment on a post, a story showing her at dinner with friends, a sudden drop in communication after you didn't react to something. All of it is part of the same matrix of pressure. Are you paying attention? Are you chasing? Are you proving your value? But here's the truth. Most men never realize until it's too late. These aren't attacks. They're tests. Evolution didn't design women to destroy men. It is designed to scan for strength, to identify protectors, to measure psychological resilience. And unfortunately, these unconscious tests still run today, even in our hyper-connected digital world. That's why explaining, pleading, or negotiating doesn't work. Because you're not in a logical discussion. You're inside a psychological evaluation system, one where your reactions tell her unconscious everything it needs to know about your fitness as a man. If you panic when she pulls away, she registers you as unstable. If you apologize for things you didn't do, she marks you as pliable. If you bend when she withdraws affection, she logs you as dependent. And this isn't about blame, it's about biology. She's not trying to manipulate you. She's trying to determine if you're worthy of her trust. That's why the only real solution isn't teaching her to behave differently. It's changing how you respond. You can't stop the game, but you can change the way you play. So, what do you do when the manipulation isn't evil, just evolutionary? When every pull away, every cold spell, every tearful guilt trip isn't planned, but programmed. You don't fix this by correcting her behavior. You fix it by re-engineering yourself. Because the unconscious mind doesn't respond to conversation, it responds to results, to feedback, to resist. If the tactic stops working, the brain stops using it. It's that simple. So here's where the transformation begins. You must build what I call psychological immunity, a mental state so stable that external emotional pressure becomes irrelevant to your inner direction. You must become unmovable. Let's break down what that looks like. The first shift is simple but difficult. Recognize the pattern in real time. Most men only see manipulation after the damage is done. After they've over-apologized, over-explained, or begged for clarity that never comes. But true sovereignty begins the moment you notice. Wait, she just withdrew after I set a boundary. This is a test. When you feel confused, when her mood turns without reason, when your instincts scream that something's off but you're told everything's fine, that's your cue. Not to confront, not to explain, but to pause, to observe. That space between her reaction and your response, that's where strength lives. The second step is emotional decoupling. You must learn to feel her shifts without being owned by them. This doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. It means not letting your identity, your self-worth, or your peace of mind rise and fall with her approval. She pulls away? Let her. She guilt trips? Let her feel it. She goes cold? You stay warm, but not because you're chasing, because you control your emotional climate. The moment you react to her withdrawal, she knows you're hooked. But when you maintain your energy regardless of her mood, that's power. That's leadership. That's psychological maturity. Next comes the hardest part for most men, finding validation from within. If you're only as strong as her affection, you're never strong at all. You must build a mission, a purpose, a personal ethic so solid that her mood, her tone, her distance can't derail it. That means doing work that fulfills you, pursuing excellence that doesn't depend on applause, becoming the kind of man who doesn't need anyone to feel whole. Because here's the truth. When a woman senses that you're complete with or without her, her unconscious stops trying to test your completeness. Biology only throws tests when it detects instability. When you're stable, the tests fade, because they no longer serve a purpose. The fourth shift is boundary enforcement. This is where most men collapse, not because they're weak, but because they mistake kindness for compliance. They confuse harmony with health. They think saying no will make her leave. But in reality, the man who never says no is never truly respected. Every time you allow passive aggression to slide, every time you fold to avoid her mood, every time you let silence punish you without speaking truth back into the room, you are training her biology that the tactic works, that you're moldable, that your backbone bends under emotional heat. But when you hold your line, when you calmly but firmly refuse to play the guilt game or accept blame for emotions that aren't yours, you rewire the dynamic, and something incredible happens. The unconscious programming stops because it has nothing left to feed on. But here's where things get fascinating. Not all women react the same when the tactics fail. Some escalate. When the gentle withdrawal doesn't work, they disappear for days. When guilt fails, they cry harder, argue louder, or unleash drama designed to destabilize you. When hot and cold reinforcement breaks, they might swing between "I love you" and "I hate you" in a matter of hours. This isn't a strategy, it's biological panic. Her influence system is breaking, and her nervous system goes into overdrive to regain control. But when you stay grounded, even through escalation, you reveal her true character. A woman who escalates manipulation when subtlety fails is not looking for partnership. She's looking for dominance, power, control. And the more you give, the more she takes. But there's another kind of woman, the rare one, who reacts differently. When she realizes the old tactics don't work on you, she grows. She adapts. She communicates. She becomes more conscious. Why? Because now she knows she has to meet you on your level. With clarity, with respect, with truth. She realizes that your strength is not a threat, it's a container. And that you're not trying to dominate her, you're refusing to be dominated. She learns to speak, not manipulate. To feel, not control. To connect, not test. This is where real intimacy begins. Because finally, both of you are showing up without armor, without manipulation, without needing to outmaneuver each other. You're two sovereign beings, not two unconscious programs. But none of this is possible unless you lead. You see, her manipulation tactics are diagnostic tools. They're scans, tests. And whether she knows it or not, she's asking one thing. Can you hold the frame when everything else goes sideways? Because if you can't, if you collapse when pressured, retreat when guilted, or chase when rejected, then how will you protect her when life comes for her? That's the evolutionary logic behind the manipulation. It's not personal, it's biological, and it will never stop unless you become the man it can't move. And here's the part no one talks about. Men who fail these tests in relationships often fail them everywhere else too. The guy who bends to his girlfriend's emotional storms is often the same guy who can't say no to his boss. The same guy who avoids conflict with family. The same guy who over-apologizes to strangers. That's because emotional weakness is a system-wide vulnerability. And when you fix it in your relationship, you fix it everywhere. When you learn to say no with clarity and calm, you start walking differently. You lead differently. You command space differently. You become the man people listen to because you're not trying to be liked. You're just being real. So when you ask, how do I stop being manipulated? The answer isn't external. It's not about fixing women. It's not about changing culture. It's about this. Become the man no tactic can move. That means clarity over chaos, presence over panic, mission over mood. When she withdraws, you stay centered. When she guilt trips, you respond, not react. When she tests, you pass by, standing still. And eventually, she stops testing, because there's nothing left to test. You've proven it, quietly, consistently, without drama. And when she sees that, the real relationship begins. The tragic truth is that manipulation, even when unconscious, eventually destroys what it was trying to protect. Women who rely on it end up with men they don't respect. Men who fall for it lose the confidence that made them attractive in the first place. And together, they build relationships on tension, not trust. But the antidote has always been there. It's not about dominance. It's about sovereignty. It's not about control. It's about clarity. She doesn't want a man who obeys every mood. She wants a man who can stand in the storm and not flinch. And if she doesn't, then she was never looking for a partner. She was looking for a puppet. You're not that man, because now you see the game, and you don't need to beat it. You just stop playing.